Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are traveling north to the isolated plains and forgotten corners of Alberta, where small towns hide secrets darker than the long winter nights. 7 true stories wait for you, each one more disturbing than the last. These are not legends passed down through generations. These are real encounters from real people who came face to face with evil in places where help is miles away and screams go unheard. From abandoned mines that conceal unspeakable crimes to farmhouses with blood-soaked histories, from creatures that should not exist to disappearances that defy explanation, Alberta's small towns have witnessed horrors that will chill you to your core. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Alberta's forgotten towns, where civilization ends and terror begins. Fort Macleod, a town that looks frozen in time. Old brick buildings from the 1800s still stand along the main street, their walls holding more memories than most people living there today. During the day, the town feels calm and peaceful. Small shops open slowly, locals greet each other, and the sound of trucks passing along the long, straight highway blends into the background. But everything changes when evening comes. As the sun sinks behind the open prairies, Fort Macleod grows quiet. Too quiet. Shadows stretch across the empty streets. Storefront lights flicker on, one by one, but the sidewalks stay empty. Most people prefer to be inside before dark. They don't say why. They simply call it tradition. The wind is different here too. It travels fast across the flat land, echoing between the old buildings and rattling loose signs. Some say the wind carries voices. Others say that's just the age of the town. But everyone agrees on one thing. Fort Macleod has a presence. There's a stillness that settles over the town at night, a feeling that something is watching. Even when the streets look completely empty. Drivers on the highway often describe seeing movement in alleyways. Others say they felt eyes following them from the rooftops or the dark corners where streetlights don't reach. Locals talk about shadows that don't belong to anyone. Shadows that move even when there's no one there to cast them. And over the years, people have come to believe that these shadows belong to one figure in particular. A figure they call the Shadow Watcher. The first report started quietly. A few residents mentioned seeing something unusual late at night, something they couldn't explain. It was always described the same way. A tall, dark figure, silent, motionless, standing in the alleys between the brick buildings, just out of reach of the dim streetlights. People said it didn't move like a normal person. It didn't walk or run. It simply watched, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, before disappearing into the darkness without a sound. One local store owner remembered locking up for the night when he saw the figure leaning against the corner of his building. He froze, staring at the shadow. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. And then, almost imperceptibly, it vanished. Others began sharing similar experiences. A woman walking her dog said she felt a presence behind her, but when she turned around, there was nothing but an empty alley. Yet the feeling of eyes, of being watched, lingered for days. Over time, the sightings became harder to ignore. Neighbors compared notes. Stories spread quietly, with people warning each other, "Don't go out alone after dark." And the more people reported seeing it, the more persistent it became. No one knew who or what it was, and no one dared to follow it. The Shadow Watcher of Fort Macleod had made its presence known, and the town would never look at the night the same way again. As more sightings were reported, a strange pattern began to emerge. The shadow watcher didn't appear every night, didn't linger at random. It only came when the wind blew hard across the town. Fort Macleod is no stranger to strong winds. The flat plains carry gusts that whistle through the streets, rattling shutters and twisting loose debris. During these storms, the air feels heavier. The night feels colder. And that's when the figure appears. Residents described it as if the wind itself summoned the watcher. A man sweeping snow from his driveway said he saw the tall figure standing across the street during a blizzard, completely unmoved, as if it was rooted to the spot. The snow swirled around it, yet it remained solid and dark. Another local told a chilling story. She was driving home during a gusty night when the figure appeared in the alley ahead. For a brief moment, she thought it was a person, but the way it leaned against the building, completely still against the force of the wind, felt impossible. What made the pattern more unsettling was its consistency. Every sighting seemed linked to storms, heavy winds, or sudden gusts that made the night feel alive with sound. And in those moments, people didn't just see the figure. They felt its presence. A silent warning carried on the wind itself. No one could explain it. Was it a spirit bound to the town? A shadow given form by the wind? Or something far older, waiting for the storm to reveal it? One thing was certain. Whenever the wind howled through Fort Macleod, the shadow watcher would be there. The shadow watcher was no longer just a story whispered among neighbors. It had crossed the line from rumor into terror. One quiet evening, in a small house on the edge of town, a family experienced it firsthand. It was a cold, windy night. The kind where the wind whistles through the cracks of old windows and makes every shadow stretch longer than it should. The child of the family, no more than 8 years old, was playing in the backyard under the dim glow of a porch light. That's when they saw it. A tall, dark figure standing completely still at the far end of the yard. Unmoving, silent, watching. At first, the child thought it was a neighbor or a friend playing a prank. But as they blinked, the figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. It didn't make a sound. Terrified, the child ran inside and told their parents. The adults rushed to the backyard, flashlights in hand. But the yard was empty. No footprints in the grass, no sign of the figure, nothing. The child insisted it was still there, watching just beyond the reach of the light. The parents didn't know what to think. They wanted to believe it was imagination. But the feeling of being watched lingered. Over the next few nights, the family noticed strange things. Objects slightly moved, doors left ajar, and always that unmistakable sense that someone, or something, was observing them from the shadows. The shadow watcher had chosen them, and from that moment, the quiet nights in Fort Macleod would never feel safe again. As the sightings grew more frequent, the police could no longer ignore the reports. Officers began patrolling the quiet streets at night, flashlights cutting through the darkness, eyes scanning every alley, every shadowed corner. At first, they found nothing. No intruders, no evidence of anyone lurking in the alleys. But the stories kept coming, residents claiming the figure appeared even when the officers were nearby. Then, during one patrol, officers stumbled upon something unusual. Old records, hidden in dusty drawers at the local station, revealed a string of historical drownings and unexplained deaths along the outskirts of town and near the old bridges. Some of the victims were children, others were young adults. All had vanished under mysterious circumstances, with no one ever able to explain what happened. At first, The police wondered if the Shadow Watcher sightings were connected to these old tragedies. But even after reviewing the records, the noises continued. Footsteps in empty alleys, a dark silhouette glimpsed from corner to corner, a sudden, unexplainable chill in the air. It became clear that the phenomenon was not tied to any one person, nor any known event. The Shadow Watcher seemed independent, unbound, and relentless. Officers admitted quietly among themselves that on windy nights, they could feel it too. A presence watching, waiting, observing from the dark. Fort Macleod's history held many secrets, and the Shadow Watcher was only the latest. One night, the town experienced a blackout like no other. The wind howled through the streets, rattling shutters and bending tree branches. Lights went out all at once, plunging Fort Macleod into complete darkness. Residents lit candles and lanterns, but the shadows grew thicker, darker, almost alive. Families huddled inside their homes, trying to ignore the strange sounds outside. Whispers carried on the wind, footsteps crunching in empty alleys, and the faint, eerie creak of doors that no one touched. Those with security cameras noticed something terrifying. The footage from their cameras, normally reliable, went black at the exact same moment the wind picked up. Some cameras briefly flickered, showing only darkness, then returned as if nothing had happened. But in that brief moment, several people swore they saw a figure moving closer. A tall, dark silhouette drifting silently across yards, stopping just short of front doors. A woman watching from her upstairs window saw it pass by her porch, its presence heavy and unnatural. It didn't knock. It didn't speak. It simply lingered, waiting, observing, before moving on to the next house. Neighbors later compared stories, and a terrifying pattern emerged. The Shadow Watcher seemed bolder during the blackout. No longer confined to alleys, it roamed closer to homes, closer to people, unafraid of being seen. For hours, the town sat in fear, listening to the wind and the silence between the gusts. When the power finally returned, some residents refused to look outside. They didn't need to. The memory of that figure, moving through the shadows of their own yards, stayed with them. That night, Fort Macleod realized something chilling. The Shadow Watcher wasn't just part of the town's alleys. It was part of the town itself. As sightings continued and the strange events escalated, the people of Fort Macleod realized they had to change their habits. They could no longer ignore what was happening. The once busy streets grew empty after dusk. Children were kept indoors, no matter how safe the night seemed. Neighbors stopped taking evening walks, and shopkeepers locked doors early, even during the busiest hours. Rumors spread quietly from house to house. "Don't go out tonight," one neighbor would warn another. "The Watcher is around," someone else whispered. Even the bravest townspeople admitted that the feeling of being watched, that unshakable dread, was real. The town collectively learned to respect the darkness. People avoided alleys. They left lights on all night. Some installed extra cameras and motion sensors, but even technology seemed powerless. The Shadow Watcher moved beyond their reach, appearing at will, untouchable, unseen except by those who dared to glimpse it. Stories circulated that the figure followed some families for weeks, silently observing from the edges of their yards, their driveways, even their windows. The message was clear. In Fort Macleod, the night belonged to something else, and the townspeople had to obey. For many, the decision wasn't about fear alone. It was about survival. Because in the quiet of the dark, when the wind howls across the prairie and the shadows grow long, the Shadow Watcher waits, always waiting, always watching. The Shadow Watcher's presence in Fort Macleod was no longer confined to alleys or backyards. It had reached the highways, the long, empty stretches that connect the town to the rest of Alberta. One night, a trucker driving a late shipment recalled a terrifying encounter. He was heading south, headlights cutting through the dark prairie night, when he noticed a figure standing at the side of the road. A tall, dark silhouette, perfectly still, even as the wind whipped around it. At first, he thought it was someone trying to hitch a ride. But as he drove past, the figure seemed to move, step for step, keeping pace with his truck, though it had no vehicle, no wheels, nothing to explain how it was keeping up. For miles, the Shadow Watcher followed him. The trucker slammed on the brakes once, twice, convinced he was imagining it. Each time he looked in his mirrors, the figure was there, just beyond the glare of his headlights, motionless, yet somehow advancing. By the time he reached the next town, the figure vanished. No footprints, no tracks, nothing left behind. Only the memory of that cold, silent presence lingering at the edge of the road. The trucker later told his story to local authorities, who had heard countless reports, but never a description so detailed and relentless. He swore he would never drive alone on that highway at night again. And that is the last known testimony of the Shadow Watcher of Fort Macleod. A figure that waits in the wind, that watches from the shadows, and follows those who dare to travel the lonely roads of this historic town. Some say it is a warning. Others say it is a remnant of something far older. Whatever it is real, and it will be waiting whenever darkness falls over Fort Macleod. Cardston, a small, peaceful town nestled beside a winding river. During the day, it's the picture of calm. Children play along the riverbanks. Locals stroll across the streets, greeting each other with familiar smiles. Boats drift lazily on the water, and the sound of birds fills the air. But just a few minutes outside the town center, the mood changes. There is an old bridge built in the 1920s that stretches across the river. Its wooden beams are weathered and worn, yet it still stands strong against the current. During the day, it seems harmless, historic even. But at night, when the town is silent, that bridge becomes a place of whispers and fear. Locals have long spoken of a dark corner beneath the bridge, a place where the shadows gather, where the wind carries strange noises, and where people claim the cries of the past can still be heard. Some say the river itself seems heavier under the bridge at night. The water looks darker, moves differently, as if disturbed by invisible hands. And while no one will openly admit why, almost everyone avoids it after sunset. It is here, under the Cardston Bridge, that the first signs of something deeply unsettling began to appear. And that peaceful town revealed a hidden darkness that no one could ignore. As night falls over Cardston, the town grows quiet. The streets empty, the river becomes still, and the shadows lengthen along the banks. It was during these late hours that the first unsettling reports began to surface. Locals spoke of strange sounds, piercing cries that echoed across the river and bounced off the bridge. The voice was unmistakably human and unmistakably female. Some described it as a young woman's scream, high-pitched, desperate, and filled with terror. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some said it was the bridge itself, groaning under the weight of invisible footsteps. Others insisted it came from the water, though the river lay calm and undisturbed beneath the moonlight. People who lived nearby began locking their windows tightly. Doors were bolted, pets refused to go outside, and even the bravest would not venture close to the bridge after midnight. One resident, walking home from a late shift, claimed she froze in place when she heard the screams. She couldn't see anyone, yet the sound felt right behind her, echoing off the water as if someone, or something, was calling out for help. These reports weren't isolated. Over the following weeks, multiple locals confirmed hearing the same cries on windy nights. And with each scream, the story of the Cardston Bridge grew darker. It became clear the peaceful town had a hidden corner where the night itself seemed alive with fear. And whatever lingered beneath that bridge was far from ordinary. As the stories of the screams spread, curiosity got the better of some of the town's younger residents. One night, 4 teenagers decided to investigate the bridge for themselves. They were cautious at first, sticking together as they walked along the quiet riverbank. Flashlights cut through the darkness, but the beam seemed swallowed by the shadows. The wooden boards of the old bridge creaked under their weight, echoing unnaturally across the water. The teens joked nervously at first, trying to mask their fear. But the deeper they ventured, the quieter the night became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the familiar sounds of crickets and frogs faded into an unsettling silence. Then, it began. A faint cry drifted across the river, just as the stories had said. High-pitched, desperate female. The teenagers froze. They exchanged uneasy glances. It was no longer a rumor. It was real. The sound seemed to move around them, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Yet every time they tried to locate it, the cry would shift, echoing from a place just out of reach. One of the teens shined a flashlight under the bridge. For a moment, they thought they saw a figure. A shadowy shape pressed against the wooden beams. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Panic set in, but the group pressed on, determined to uncover the source of the noise. Every step across the bridge made the cries louder, more insistent, almost pleading. By the time they reached the far end, the teenagers were shaken to their core. They realized they had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. Whatever haunted the bridge was not a person. It was something else entirely. And it was aware of them. As the teenagers huddled on the old wooden bridge, the cries grew louder, closer. But then, something changed. The sound shifted. It was no longer the unmistakable scream of a young woman. It became guttural, distorted, and unrecognizable. It was not human. It was not animal. Yet it carried a terror that no creature should possess. The teens froze, hearts pounding in the cold night air. The sound seemed to echo from every direction at once, bouncing off the water and the wooden beams. It was like the river itself had come alive, wailing in anguish. One of the teens whispered, barely audible, What is that?" Another pointed toward the shadows under the bridge, but there was nothing there. No figure, no movement, just the sound, horrifying, relentless, and impossible to locate. The group realized they were hearing something far older than themselves, something that had been trapped there for decades, crying out in the darkness, waiting for someone to hear. Every instinct screamed at them to run. But the cries followed, echoing in the still night air, carrying a message of fear they could not understand. That night, on the Cardston Bridge, the teenagers discovered that some noises are meant to remain unexplained, and some shadows are meant to be left alone. As the reports from residents and the teenagers grew more frequent, the local police could no longer ignore the strange events at the bridge. Officers began patrolling the area during late hours, flashlights sweeping across the wooden beams and the riverbank. They expected to find pranksters, perhaps a stray animal, but the bridge was always empty. Digging into old records, they uncovered a dark history. Several decades earlier, there had been a series of drownings in the river near the bridge. Young women, mostly, whose bodies were never fully recovered. Some incidents had been attributed to accidents, others were never solved. Yet, despite these grim findings, the noises continued. The eerie cries that locals had reported were still heard on windy nights. Even when the river lay calm and the bridge appeared abandoned, the sounds returned, high-pitched, desperate, echoing across the water. Officers admitted quietly that they too felt something watching from the shadows. Some claimed to hear footsteps on the bridge when no one was there. Others reported seeing fleeting shapes at the edge of the water, only to vanish the moment they were spotted. It became clear the Cardston Bridge was more than just a site of past tragedy. The river carried the memory of those who had vanished, and the cries were a chilling reminder that not all echoes from the past stay buried. The police investigation only confirmed one terrifying truth. The bridge was haunted, and the darkness beneath it was far from ordinary. The terror of the Cardston Bridge reached a new level one summer night, when a camper went missing. He was a young man, experienced and careful, who had set up his tent near the riverbank, just a few hundred meters from the old bridge. Friends reported that he had gone for a short walk after dinner, saying he wanted to explore the area before nightfall. That was the last anyone saw of him. Search parties combed the river and the surrounding woods. Officers and volunteers called his name, shining flashlights into the shadows. But there was no trace, no footprints, no disturbance, nothing to suggest where he had gone. Witnesses later claimed to have heard his voice near the bridge. A faint shout, followed by a panicked scream, carried on the wind. But when they ran toward the sound, the night was empty. The bridge itself seemed to swallow the noise, echoing it back in a distorted, horrifying manner. Even more unsettling, residents who passed the bridge in the following nights reported feeling a sudden, chilling presence. Some claimed to see a dark figure standing under the bridge, watching silently, as though it had claimed another victim. The missing camper's disappearance became a grim reminder. The Cardston Bridge was not safe. Not for curious teenagers, not for hikers, not for anyone who dared venture too close after sunset. The locals learned quickly, some paths should never be taken. Some corners of the town hold darkness that waits patiently, and the bridge had claimed another soul that night. After the camper disappeared and the strange cries persisted, the people of Cardston made a choice. The once friendly riverbank became off-limits after dark. Families stopped taking evening walks, and children were kept inside even on warm summer nights. Residents avoided the bridge completely, no matter how curious or brave they felt during the day. Warnings spread quietly from neighbor to neighbor. "Don't go near the bridge tonight," they would say. "You might not come back." Some tried to use flashlights or cameras to catch a glimpse of what lingered beneath the bridge. None succeeded. The figure, or whatever made those cries, remained unseen, yet its presence was undeniable. Even local authorities admitted that the bridge was more than just a historical structure. It had become a place where fear was alive, where the night itself felt dangerous, and where curiosity could turn into tragedy. The town learned to respect the darkness. Lights stayed on longer at homes near the river. Visitors were warned to keep their distance. And on windy nights, when the cries carried across the water, people didn't just listen, they obeyed. The town's decision was simple. Some places are better left alone. And the Cardston Bridge, with its dark history and unexplainable screams, became one of those places. The final warning about the Cardston Bridge did not come from police reports or old records. It came from the residents themselves, those who had lived through the screams, the disappearances, and the nights when the shadows seemed alive. One elderly local, speaking quietly to a neighbor, said it plainly, "Never stand alone under that bridge." The words carried weight. It was not superstition, nor an attempt to scare. It was a lesson learned from decades of unexplained terror, a truth passed down quietly from one generation to the next. Even on calm nights, the bridge seemed to watch. The wind whispered through its wooden beams, carrying the faint echoes of cries long forgotten, but never silenced. Anyone daring to step beneath it alone risked more than fear. They risked encountering something that had waited decades, unseen, patient, and hungry for attention. Visitors to Cardston are often warned. Admire the bridge from a distance, respect its history, but do not linger beneath it after dark, because the shadows there do not forgive. And the screams are not always just echoes. The Cardston Bridge remains a quiet, peaceful landmark by day. But by night, it serves as a chilling reminder that some places hold darkness that refuses to be forgotten. And for anyone who values their life, the advice is simple. Never stand alone under that bridge. Outside High River, past the edge of the last paved road, sits an old farmhouse. Its paint is peeling, the roof sags in places, and the windows are frost-covered even in early winter. For years, no one has lived there. Yet the house remains exactly as it was left. Furniture in place, dishes on counters, coats still hanging in the hallway. Locals speak of it cautiously. They say the farmhouse is different. Time doesn't pass the same way there. Even the wind seems to avoid it, carrying a strange stillness across the frozen fields. Visitors who've dared to step inside tell of the chill that doesn't belong to winter air. A feeling that someone or something is watching, even when no one else is around. But it's the windows that draw the most attention. From the outside, frost obscures most of the view. Yet on the coldest nights, some say they see a figure behind the glass. A woman, pale and still, staring outward as if waiting for someone who will never come. The house has stood like this for decades, untouched by time, untouched by residents. Yet it holds a presence, a lingering shadow that continues to haunt the land outside High River. And this is where the first signs of the haunting begin. The legend of the High River farmhouse begins with the windows. On the coldest winter nights, when the frost thickens and the moon casts pale light over the fields, locals say a silhouette appears in the upper window. It is always a woman, tall, thin, standing perfectly still, as if frozen along with the glass itself. Her face is impossible to make out. Yet those who've glimpsed her swear they feel her eyes, following, waiting, silently pleading. People who live nearby claim to see her figure for only a few seconds before she vanishes. Sometimes she appears to be gazing at the road, as if expecting someone to return, someone long gone. Other times, she seems to drift along the window pane, unmoving, yet impossible to ignore. Stories say she appears more often during heavy snowfall, when the wind howls across the fields, and when the night is at its darkest. Children dare not wander near the house, and even adults crossing the road quickly avert their gaze from the frozen window. The legend is whispered quietly in High River. Those who see her may never speak of it openly. Those who stare too long may never forget the emptiness behind her eyes. And on nights when the frost is thick and the wind carries across the fields, the woman in the frozen window waits, silently, patiently, for anyone who dares to notice her presence. The farmhouse had long been a subject of local curiosity, but no one had concrete proof, until a visiting photographer decided to explore the area. He was drawn by the stories of the frozen window, the woman who appeared on cold winter nights. Equipped with his camera, he approached the abandoned farmhouse carefully, stepping over frost-covered grass and broken boards. Through the lens, everything seemed normal at first. The house stood silent and empty, frozen in time, with frost glinting under the moonlight. Then he raised his camera toward the upper window and froze. For a brief moment, the silhouette of a woman appeared in the glass. Not a shadow, not a trick of light, something solid. And in that moment, he captured a clear image, a pale, almost ghostly face, staring directly outward. He later showed the photo to locals. They recognized her immediately, the same figure described for decades in whispers and warnings. The face was haunting, eyes wide, expression unreadable, yet filled with a sorrow that made viewers shiver. It was clear that this was no illusion, no trick of frost or shadow. Something lingered in that upper window, something waiting for anyone who dared to look too closely. The photographer's evidence cemented the legend. The woman in the frozen window was real, and her presence in the abandoned farmhouse was undeniable. To understand the haunting of the High River farmhouse, one must look back to the 1940s. During a particularly harsh winter, a family that once lived in the house disappeared without a trace. Snowdrifts buried the fields around the farmhouse, and the river swelled with ice and frost. Search parties scoured the area, but the family was never found. Locals believe that the tragedy left a mark on the house itself. The story was whispered for decades. A mother, separated from her children during a blizzard, lost in the cold and darkness. Some claim that she died calling for them, wandering the frozen fields, her cries carried away by the wind. Over the years, residents began reporting strange occurrences, cold spots inside the empty house, shadows moving across the frost-covered windows, and the faint sound of a woman's voice echoing in the night. The upper window, where the woman now appears, is said to be where she once waited for her family to return. Even today, the townspeople treat the farmhouse with caution. It is more than an abandoned building. It is a vessel of sorrow, a reminder of a winter that claimed lives and left a presence that refuses to leave. The High River farmhouse is not just haunted by shadows. It is haunted by history, by grief, and by the enduring echo of a family lost to the cold. The legend of the woman in the frozen window did not fade with time. Even in recent years, motorists driving past the abandoned farmhouse have reported unsettling encounters. On cold, moonlit nights, multiple drivers claim to have seen her silhouette in the upper window. At first, it appears distant, just a shadow in the frost. But as they drive closer, the figure becomes clear. A woman standing perfectly still, her pale face pressed to the glass. Some drivers swerved in shock, headlights illuminating nothing outside the window. Others stopped completely, heart pounding, only to find the farmhouse empty when they looked directly. Witnesses describe a chilling sense of being watched. It is not fear born of imagination, but something deeper, a cold, pressing awareness that lingers long after the figure disappears. Even those familiar with the story admit that seeing her is different. It is one thing to hear the legend. It is another to see the ghostly presence for yourself. The modern sightings prove that the farmhouse is not simply haunted by memory or history. It is haunted by something very much alive in the cold night air. The woman in the frozen window has become a warning, a reminder that some stories, no matter how old, do not stay in the past, and that some shadows, continue to watch. Curiosity about the High River farmhouse eventually drew a professional paranormal investigation team. They arrived one frigid winter evening, cameras, EMF meters, and audio recorders in hand, determined to capture evidence of the haunting. From the moment they stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was colder than the outside temperature, biting at exposed skin. The wooden floorboards groaned underfoot, but there was no wind. A sense of being watched pressed against them from every shadowed corner. Almost immediately, their equipment began to fail. Cameras flickered and shut off, EMF meters spiked uncontrollably, and audio recorders captured only static. One investigator even reported feeling an invisible hand brush against their shoulder, though the room was empty. When the team focused on the upper window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman, the frost seemed to shift, as if a figure were moving inside the glass. Their flashlights flickered, and suddenly, all devices cut out at once. For several minutes, the farmhouse was completely silent and dark, the team's only guide the faint moonlight outside. Eventually, the equipment resumed, but nothing of significance had been recorded, except for a lingering sense of dread. The presence was real, undeniable, and it resisted all attempts to be captured or explained. The team left that night with more questions than answers, and one conclusion was clear. The woman in the frozen window does not allow herself to be documented. She waits, she watches, and she refuses to be disturbed. The climax of the haunting occurred one bitterly cold winter night, when a resident dared to approach the farmhouse alone. They had heard the stories, seen the photographs, and yet curiosity drew them toward the upper window. As they reached the front of the house, their breath forming clouds in the icy air, the silhouette appeared once more. The woman stood motionless behind the frost-covered glass, pale and unmoving, her gaze fixed outward. The resident watched, frozen with a mix of fear and awe, for several long moments. Then, something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silhouette began to move. She stepped back from the window, retreating into the shadows of the room beyond. Her presence faded like mist, leaving only the cold silence of the empty house. The resident later admitted that the experience left them shaken for days. It was as if the figure had acknowledged their presence and decided they were not meant to stay. A silent warning, delivered without words, but with a weight that could be felt in the bones. From that night onward, the High River farmhouse became even more forbidden. No one dared linger near the windows. And those who did claim one thing: the woman in the frozen window watches, waits, and moves at her own will, always just out of reach, always beyond comprehension. For the townspeople, and for anyone who passes by in the dark, the message is clear. Some shadows are not meant to be confronted, and some presences are not meant to be understood. Even decades after the first sightings, the woman in the frozen window has not vanished from High River. Recent encounters continue to terrify those who pass the abandoned farmhouse at night. One late winter evening, a driver's dash cam unexpectedly froze as they passed the house. When the footage resumed, a pale figure could be seen in the upper window, motionless, staring outward, as if aware of the recording device itself. Other motorists have reported similar occurrences. Dash cams glitch, cell phone cameras fail, and even professional photographers admit their equipment malfunctions when attempting to capture her image. Yet the presence remains undeniable. Locals now warn that it is not enough to avoid the farmhouse casually. The woman watches, and she seems to have grown aware of those who try to record her. Those who have glimpsed her recently describe the same cold dread, the same feeling of being observed by something patient and intelligent. The High River haunting proves that some legends are not confined to history books or whispers in the night. They are living reminders of sorrow, of tragedy, and of a presence that refuses to be forgotten. For anyone driving past the old farmhouse in winter, take heed. Dash cams may fail, cameras may freeze, and the woman in the frozen window will be watching. Drumheller is famous for its badlands, vast stretches of dusty earth, jagged cliffs, and winding roads that seem to disappear into the horizon. During the day, the landscape is breathtaking, rugged, and full of history. But at night, these roads take on a different character. Desolate, silent, lonely. For decades, locals have warned travelers about driving after dark. The roads are narrow, winding through canyons and dry riverbeds, with little to no light. Headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only the next curve, the next cliff, the next stretch of seemingly endless land. It is along these roads that the first sightings of the silent patrolman began. Drivers report seeing a lone figure standing beside the asphalt, appearing to direct traffic, or perhaps watching them. He is dressed in old-fashioned police attire, a uniform that seems decades out of date. At first, it seems like a helpful presence, a figure guiding travelers through the lonely roads. But there is something off. The patrolman never speaks, never moves his lips, and when approached, he vanishes without a trace. The endless roads of Drumheller's Badlands have witnessed countless travelers, and some have come across the silent patrolman in the dead of night, unaware of the chilling truth that lies ahead. Late one night, a driver was making their way through the winding roads of Drumheller's Badlands. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but endless stretches of asphalt and jagged cliffs. Suddenly, in the distance, a figure appeared on the roadside. A police officer standing in the dim glow of a flashlight, signaling for the driver to pull over. The driver, cautious but compliant, slowed down and stopped by the side of the road. The officer approached silently, uniform neat, hat pulled low, hands resting calmly at his sides. Yet there was something strange. The figure made no sound, gave no words, not even a nod. The driver asked a question, something simple. "Is there a problem?" But the officer remained silent. Blinking under the glare of the headlights, the driver noticed that the uniform looked wrong. Faded, old-fashioned, almost out of place. And then, without warning, the figure vanished. No footprints in the dust, no sign of movement, just an empty stretch of road and the lingering feeling of being watched. Word spread among locals. This was no ordinary police officer. Drivers realized that those pulled over at night might not be dealing with someone real at all, but with the silent patrolman, a presence that appears helpful at first, only to disappear, leaving fear and confusion in its wake. The Badlands roads of Drumheller became known not just for their beauty, but for the phantom officer who patrols them, silently, eternally, and unseen by daylight. One of the most unsettling encounters with the silent patrolman involved a driver who was handed a ticket during the night. The officer appeared just as he always does, silent, immovable, and somehow otherworldly. The driver was confused, but complied, taking the paper from the officer's hand. Fingers trembling, they tried to read the fine print under the dim light of the headlights. The ticket seemed ordinary at first, listing the driver's information, a vague infraction, and a date and time. But by the time the driver arrived home and tried to examine it more closely, the paper had changed. The writing had begun to fade. By morning, the ticket was completely blank. No name, no infraction, no markings at all. It was as if the encounter had never happened, except for the lingering memory and the unease that remained. Locals say this is a hallmark of the silent patrolman. He appears real, interacts with travelers, and even leaves tangible evidence. Yet that evidence never lasts. Like a ghost enforcing laws from another time, his presence is fleeting, yet unforgettable. Drivers who experience him report a feeling of deep unease long after the encounter. A sense that something is still watching them, following them down the empty roads. And they know, without question, that the silent patrolman is not part of the modern world. He exists somewhere between reality and shadow, only visible when the Badlands are quiet and the night is darkest. As sightings of the silent patrolman continued, whispers began to spread among locals. People recalled an officer who had patrolled the Drumheller roads decades ago. He was dedicated, respected, and known for his nightly rounds, ensuring travelers stayed safe on the desolate Badlands roads. But one winter night, he disappeared during a patrol. Some say he was caught in a sudden snowstorm. His body never recovered. The stories began to merge. Could the figure haunting the roads be this long-dead officer? Those who had seen him described the same uniform, the same silent presence, the same eerie way he appeared out of nowhere. Locals started telling each other, "Do not trust the officer who appears at night. He may have once been real, but now he is something else entirely. A ghostly echo of the past, enforcing rules that no longer exist, patrolling roads that no longer need him." The more people shared their experiences, the clearer it became that this was not an isolated phenomenon. The silent patrolman had become part of Drumheller's night, a legend born from tragedy, a warning for anyone traveling after dark. The roads remained empty for many, and those who dared venture out could feel the presence before they ever saw him. Silent, patient, and hauntingly real. As the legend of the silent patrolman grew, reports came not just from locals, but from long-haul truckers who frequently traveled the Drumheller roads at night. Each account was eerily consistent. The same figure, the same uniform, outdated yet perfectly intact. The same silent, immovable stance by the roadside. Truckers described approaching the officer, expecting instructions or a warning, only to find he did not speak, did not move, and seemed almost unreal. Some tried to turn their headlights directly at him, only to find the figure vanishing before their eyes. Others swore that even when the truck was moving at full speed, the patrolman seemed to keep pace, appearing at every bend in the road, as if following them deliberately. The repetition of the sightings convinced many truckers that this was no coincidence. It was the same entity haunting the same stretches of asphalt, night after night, decade after decade. Some refused to drive those roads after dark entirely, rerouting miles out of fear of encountering the silent patrolman. The consistent reports only fueled the chilling reality. This figure is more than a ghost story. He is a presence embedded in the roads themselves, a spectral patrolman who watches, waits, and haunts the Badlands. Forever, a silent warning to those traveling in the dark. As the reports continued, a troubling pattern began to emerge. The silent patrolman was not seen randomly along the Drumheller roads. Multiple witnesses noted that he appeared near the same curve, a bend notorious for accidents, where several drivers had lost their lives over the years. Locals call it the fatal curve, a stretch of road where the asphalt twists sharply, cliffs rise abruptly, and visibility at night is minimal. It was here that the patrolman seemed to manifest most often, appearing suddenly at the roadside, silent and watchful. Truckers and drivers who had encountered him at this spot report a chilling sensation. The air grows colder, the headlights feel dimmer, and a sense of inevitability creeps over them. Some say it feels as though he is warning them, while others believe he is waiting for something far more sinister. The connection between the spectral officer and the crash site cannot be ignored. It is as if the patrolman is tied to the history of the road itself, guarding it, haunting it, and appearing wherever tragedy has struck. For anyone who drives the Badlands at night, this curve is no longer just dangerous because of the road conditions. It is dangerous because of what waits there, silently, dressed in the uniform of a bygone era. A reminder of past lives lost and the shadows that linger over Drumheller's desolate roads. The silent patrolman is not purely malevolent. Some drivers report that he seems to act with purpose, guiding them away from danger, or at least what they later discover could have been fatal. Several motorists recount being pulled over near the infamous curve. They describe the officer's silent stance, the way he pointed them in a different direction or gestured for them to slow down. Moments later, drivers realized they had narrowly avoided an accident, a sudden patch of ice, a hidden drop, or a sharp bend they hadn't noticed. But not every encounter ends calmly. Some drivers, unprepared for the figure's eerie presence, panic at the sight of him. He does not speak, does not reassure. He merely watches, and the fear can be overwhelming. In these cases, the driver may swerve, slam the brakes, or freeze entirely, sometimes creating more danger than the road itself. Locals now say the patrolman serves as both guardian and warning. He protects those who are cautious, but punishes, or at least terrifies, those who approach recklessly. He is a reminder that the Drumheller roads are not just dangerous because of their terrain, but because some presences linger, bound to the past, observing the present, and enforcing rules that no living officer ever could. The silent patrolman remains a mystery. He saves some, scares others, and leaves all who see him with a lasting impression. The Badlands are not empty at night. They are watched, and he is still patrolling. Even today, the silent patrolman continues to haunt the roads around Drumheller. Modern technology has not protected drivers from him. Multiple reports describe dashcams freezing the moment he appears, headlights flickering, and GPS devices malfunctioning as if the very presence of the patrolman disrupts reality itself. One trucker recounted a recent encounter. As he approached the fatal curve, a figure appeared silently on the roadside. He grabbed his dashcam to record it, but the screen froze, showing only a distorted outline. Moments later, the patrolman vanished, leaving nothing but the empty road and the lingering chill in the cab. Other motorists report the same pattern. Phones fail to capture him, cameras glitch, and yet the terrifying presence is undeniable. Those who encounter him leave shaken, a mixture of fear and awe settling in as they continue their journey. The silent patrolman of Drumheller roads is no mere legend. He patrols relentlessly, appearing at the sites of past accidents, guiding or warning those who drive the lonely Badlands. And anyone traveling after dark should remember, dashcams may fail, devices may freeze, but the patrolman is still watching, always watching. Outside Vermilion, past winding dirt roads and endless fields, sits a farmhouse that had stood empty for years. A family moved in one spring, hoping for a fresh start. At first, everything seemed normal. The house was sturdy, the land fertile, and the surrounding countryside peaceful. Chickens clucked in the yard, crops swayed gently in the breeze, and the nights were quiet, calm, and perfect for settling in. Neighbors welcomed them cautiously, curious but polite, sharing stories of the area without mentioning the warnings that had circulated quietly over the decades. The family felt fortunate at first. enjoying the isolation, the wide open sky, and the freedom that came with rural life. They were unaware that this farmhouse, long abandoned and forgotten, had a history the locals never spoke of aloud. A history where time itself seemed to behave differently, and where the past refuses to remain buried. It began subtly at first. The family noticed that the clocks in the farmhouse seemed off. The kitchen clock, the alarm clock by the bedroom, even the old grandfather clock in the hallway, all stopped precisely at 3:11 a.m. At first, they assumed it was a coincidence, a quirk of old wiring or weak batteries. But night after night, the same thing happened. Every clock, regardless of make or location, froze at exactly 3:11 a.m., ticking again only after sunrise, as if the darkness itself held time hostage. Even stranger, the family reported a sudden drop in temperature at that exact moment. The air would grow icy, breath visible inside the house, and a heavy silence would settle in, so thick it pressed against their ears. It became impossible to ignore. 3:11 a.m. was no longer just a time on the clock. It was a signal. A moment when the house itself seemed to pause, when reality felt distorted, as if the farmhouse existed partly in another realm. Neighbors later whispered that the farmhouse had a history of unusual phenomena, but no one had dared to explain it fully. The family now understood why. At 3:11 a.m., something awakens. Something that watches, waits, and bends the rules of time itself. As the nights continued, the unsettling events escalated. It started in the basement. At first, the family heard faint, irregular sounds, like something being moved, but no one was there. Then the noises grew louder. Tools clattering, boxes shifting, even the faint scraping of wood against concrete. The family would descend the stairs cautiously, hearts pounding, only to find the basement empty. Tools lay on the floor, scattered as if someone had been working or searching. But there was no explanation. Nothing had been moved during the day, and doors remained locked. The sounds always seemed to appear after 3:11 a.m., just as the clocks froze. It was as if the house itself came alive at that precise moment, performing some secret activity in the dark. No matter how carefully the family monitored the basement, lights on, cameras set, they could not capture the cause. The noises remained elusive, echoing through the wooden beams and concrete floors, a haunting reminder that the farmhouse was never truly empty. Neighbors whispered that previous occupants had reported the same phenomenon. Objects moving on their own, unseen presences in the basement, and the distinct sense of being watched. The Vermilion farmhouse had a secret, one that insisted on making its presence known each night in the form of restless, clattering shadows. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, the family discovered an old, leather-bound diary belonging to the farmhouse's previous owner, an elderly man who had lived there decades ago. As they flipped through the pages, they realized the diary contained more than just mundane notes about crops and weather. There were repeated mentions of something unusual on the land. The grandfather wrote about time slipping, of moments when clocks seemed to pause and days felt strangely elongated or shortened. He described nights when sounds echoed from empty rooms, shadows moved without cause, and objects shifted mysteriously. The entries grew more frantic toward the end, with phrases like 3:11. It begins again, time stops, and I cannot leave. The family realized that they were not experiencing isolated incidents. They were living the same phenomenon documented decades earlier. The diary served as proof that the farmhouse had a strange influence over the very flow of time. something deeply rooted in the land itself. What had once seemed like quirky old house oddities, the clocks freezing, the basement noises, now took on a terrifying significance. Time was not behaving naturally here, and the diary warned that those who ignored the pattern risked becoming trapped in it, bound to the farmhouse in ways they could not understand. The family understood. The Vermilion farmhouse was more than a home. It was a place where reality itself could bend, and time could stop. The unsettling events on the Vermilion farm were not limited to humans. Even the family's animals began reacting strangely, as if they could sense the presence that haunted the land. The family's dogs, normally energetic and obedient, suddenly refused to enter the barn. They would stand at the doorway, ears pinned back, growling softly at nothing visible. Attempts to coax them inside failed. They would pace anxiously outside, refusing to cross the threshold. Chickens clucked nervously, gathering near the farmhouse instead of venturing into their usual pens. Even the family's cats avoided certain corners of the property, hissing at empty spaces and retreating to the warm interior of the house. It was clear that something on the land was disturbing enough to affect instinct itself. The animals' behavior served as a warning that whatever was present at the Vermilion farm was not only supernatural, but intelligent, aware of those who dared approach. The family began to rely on the animals as early warning systems, understanding that the behavior of their pets often indicated when the disturbances were about to intensify. And night after night, the sense of unseen eyes, of a presence waiting, grew stronger, mirrored in the anxious reactions of every creature on the farm. One night, the family experienced something far more disturbing than clocks freezing or animals acting strangely. It began just after 3:11 a.m., when the familiar cold settled over the farmhouse. The air grew heavy and still, the silence almost tangible. As they tried to stay awake, the family suddenly realized that hours had passed in what felt like minutes. They looked at the clocks, still frozen at 3:11 a.m. The kitchen timer, the bedroom clocks, even their watches had stopped. Yet when morning came, everything resumed as if no time had been lost. They couldn't explain what had happened. It was as if the house had swallowed the hours whole. The feeling of missing time was accompanied by a deep, unshakable dread. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision. Faint whispers echoed in the hallways, and the heavy silence pressed against their minds. Even the animals were agitated, pacing, growling, or huddling together, sensing the disruption. By sunrise, the family was exhausted, shaken, and terrified. They understood that the farmhouse didn't just pause clocks or rattle objects. It had the power to manipulate time itself, trapping those inside in a loop they could not comprehend. The Vermilion farm was no longer simply strange. It was dangerous, and the family realized that every night after 3:11 a.m., they were at the mercy of something ancient, unseen, and in control of the very flow of time. After repeated reports of strange happenings, the family contacted the local authorities. 2 officers arrived one cold evening, arriving just as the clocks approached 3:11 a.m. At first, they were skeptical. They walked through the farmhouse, checked wiring, and examined each clock. But as the minutes ticked closer to the dreaded hour, the officers' skepticism began to falter. At exactly 3:11 a.m., every clock in the house stopped. Not one ticked, not one moved. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards, though no one had moved. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Their flashlights flickered, and the air seemed heavier, colder, pressing against them like an invisible hand. They could feel it. Something in the farmhouse was aware of their presence, observing, waiting. One officer later admitted that he felt time itself had warped. Minutes passed like seconds, and yet a deep exhaustion and dread weighed on him, as if the house had drained his energy. They left the farmhouse shaken, unable to offer a rational explanation for what they had witnessed. Even the authorities, trained to respond to emergencies and anomalies, recognized that the Vermilion farmhouse was no ordinary haunting. It had a power over time itself, a force that could not be measured, recorded, or resisted. And for the family, and anyone who dared enter, the warning was clear. This house is alive in ways that defy understanding, and the night after 3:11 a.m. is not safe. Today, the Vermilion farmhouse stands empty once again. Locals warn that no family stays for long. Those who try rarely last more than 6 months. The clocks freeze, time slips away, and unseen forces continue their nightly activity. Even the bravest residents leave, unable to endure the cold, the silence, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The land itself seems to reject anyone who tries to call it home. Animals refuse to enter the barn, clocks refuse to tick, and the air is heavy with the weight of decades of strange, unexplained occurrences. Visitors who pass by report seeing lights flicker in the windows at night, shadows moving where no one stands, and a sense of time itself bending around the property. Some swear they hear faint whispers carried on the wind, remnants of the family's fleeting presence. The Vermilion farm is a stark reminder. Some places hold histories and powers beyond comprehension. Time may continue outside, but here it stops, waits, and watches. And anyone daring enough to enter must accept the reality. This land does not forgive curiosity, and it never forgets those who linger too long. Edmonton's streets are quiet after midnight. For night shift workers, students, or late travelers, buses run on empty routes, often with only the driver and a handful of passengers aboard. After 1 a.m., these streets are almost deserted, the city lights casting long shadows across empty roads. It is during these hours that the first strange sightings occurred. Bus drivers reported a lone passenger boarding late at night. A figure that seemed normal at first, sitting quietly, never speaking, and always keeping to themselves. But there was something unsettling about the passenger. No matter the route, the person appeared suddenly, often at stops where no one had requested a ride. And when drivers would look away for a moment, the seat would sometimes appear empty, only for the passenger to reappear closer to the front when glanced at again. The city streets, normally predictable and safe, became eerie in the presence of this silent traveler. It was as if the bus itself had entered another dimension, a liminal space where something unexplainable could manifest. Drivers began to dread the late-night shifts, unsure if they were dealing with a real passenger or a presence that should not exist. And for those on the route, the Edmonton Ghost Bus had become a legend whispered among night travelers. A warning that the city's quietest hours were not empty. They were watched. On our one night, a veteran bus driver on the late-night Edmonton route noticed something unusual. A lone woman sat in the back of the bus, perfectly still, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She wore a simple coat and scarf, blending in as any ordinary passenger might. At first, he thought nothing of it. Late-night routes often carry quiet, tired riders. But as the journey continued, he realized something was off. The woman never looked at the street outside, never adjusted her posture, and never responded when he called out to confirm her stop. When the bus reached the stop she had indicated, the driver approached, and the seat was empty. The doors hadn't opened, and no one had exited. He checked the back of the bus carefully. the woman had vanished without a sound. Shaken, the driver shared his experience with colleagues, only to discover that others had seen the same silent passenger. She appeared on different nights, different routes, always silent, always disappearing without a trace. The first encounter was enough to make drivers wary of the late-night hours. For the streets of Edmonton were no longer just quiet. They were unpredictable, haunted by a passenger who existed somewhere between reality and shadow. From that night on, the legend of the silent passenger began to grow, whispered among bus drivers and late-night travelers alike. A ghostly presence riding the city streets after dark. Drivers soon noticed a disturbing pattern. The silent passenger never completed the route. Several reported that at a stop, the doors never opened for her. The bus slowed, the brakes hissed, and yet she remained seated in the back, silent, motionless. When the doors finally closed and the bus continued, the seat would be empty. No footsteps, no rustle of clothing, just an empty seat where she had been moments before. Some drivers swore the disappearance happened mid-route. One recounted glancing away for a few seconds while checking mirrors, only to look back and find the woman gone. The temperature in the bus seemed to drop slightly during these moments, a cold that lingered long after she vanished. Passengers who boarded at later stops sometimes reported catching a glimpse of her briefly before she disappeared again, always silently, always without explanation. The phenomenon was unnerving, yet consistent. The silent passenger did not leave the bus the way normal riders did. She seemed to exist on a different plane, appearing and vanishing at will. And with each encounter, the city's quietest streets felt a little more haunted, the empty hours a little less safe. Drivers began to dread the late-night routes, knowing that even the most ordinary night could bring the inexplicable. A ghostly passenger, riding without destination, leaving only fear and mystery in her wake. As the reports from bus drivers multiplied, city officials could no longer ignore the strange occurrences. Multiple complaints described the same phenomenon. A lone woman, always in the same seat, silent, motionless, appearing late at night. Each driver's account matched the other's almost exactly, from her posture to the exact moment she vanished. The city dispatched a small investigative team to ride the late-night routes, cameras in hand, notebooks ready. They boarded buses after 1 a.m., hoping to capture evidence or explain the strange sightings. But every attempt yielded the same result. The cameras would show an empty seat when viewed later. No recordings captured her movements, no sound registered on the microphones. Yet every driver's memory remained vivid. The figure had been there, silently watching, existing, undeniably present. Officials began to acknowledge that something unexplainable was happening. It was not a prank, not a trick of the mind, and certainly not a malfunction of the bus itself. The silent passenger was real, at least in the experiences of those who had encountered her. Despite modern technology, the mystery endured, and as the legend grew, drivers and late-night riders began to treat the route with caution. A seat in the back of the bus, empty to the world, could conceal something far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. As the investigation unfolded, researchers began digging into the history of the late-night bus route. They discovered a tragic accident from decades earlier. A young woman had boarded the same bus late at night, returning from a city event. Somewhere along the route, the bus lost control on a quiet street, and she was killed in the collision. Her death was shocking at the time, but over the years, it became little more than a footnote in the city's records. Yet now, the connection to the silent passenger became chillingly clear. The woman who died decades ago appeared to have returned. Every sighting matched her description: the quiet demeanor, the long coat, and her seat at the back of the bus. Even the moments of disappearance aligned with the location and timing of the accident. Drivers began to believe that her spirit was trapped on the route, endlessly riding the bus she had once taken in life. Silent, observing, and unable to leave, she had become part of the city's nocturnal streets. The historical accident explained her presence, but it did little to ease the fear. Those who encounter her still feel the same chill, the same unshakable unease. For the silent passenger of Edmonton is no ordinary ghost. She is tied to the road, to the bus, and to a moment in time that refuses to end. As the legend of the silent passenger grew, the city installed security cameras on several buses to capture evidence. What they recorded was unnerving. Footage showed the back seat empty to the eye, but the seat cushion visibly compressed, as if someone were sitting there. Moments later, the cushion returned to its original shape, and no passenger could be seen. Drivers who watched the footage felt a cold chill, recognizing the precise movements they had experienced firsthand. The ghostly presence was not only felt, it had left a physical trace, bending reality in subtle but undeniable ways. Attempts to track her with infrared cameras, motion sensors, and even thermal imaging produced similar results. The sensors would detect weight or pressure, but visually, the passenger remained invisible. The silent passenger existed between worlds, perceptible only through the reactions of the environment itself. This modern evidence confirmed what drivers had long suspected. She was not a hallucination nor a prank. She was a lingering spirit, tied irrevocably to the route she had once traveled in life. And as the cameras continued to record, one truth became frighteningly clear: the bus is never truly empty after 1 a.m. And the silent passenger is always watching, always present, and forever silent. One of the most unsettling encounters involved a veteran bus driver, someone who had spent decades on Edmonton's late-night routes. One night, he noticed the silent passenger again, sitting in her usual seat at the back. This time, instead of avoiding her gaze, he decided to speak. He called out softly, asking if she needed help, if she was lost, or if she wanted to get off at the next stop. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The figure turned her head ever so slightly, just enough for him to feel a chilling presence. But before he could see her face clearly, she vanished entirely. No sound, no movement, no trace left behind. Just an empty seat and a bus full of quiet dread. The experience shook him to his core. After that night, he refused to drive the late-night routes alone, citing the encounter as the reason for his sudden resignation. Other drivers who heard his story nodded silently, knowing they had felt the same cold, unshakable fear. It became clear that the silent passenger responded only when acknowledged. Yet, even that acknowledgement brought her closer to manifesting, or disappearing entirely in a way no one could explain. She was not just a ghostly observer. She was a presence that reacted, interacted, and reminded anyone who saw her that some forces cannot be reasoned with. The bus routes of Edmonton after 1 a.m. would never be the same again. The city had a rider who could not alight, a spirit that refused to rest, and drivers who had learned the hard way. Some passengers are never meant to be spoken to. Even today, the Edmonton Ghost bus route carries its silent passenger. Drivers who work late-night shifts take precautions, avoiding the back seats entirely. They report a sense of unease, a chill that spreads through the bus as they approach stops after 1 a.m. Some refuse to work the route alone, pairing with colleagues for support, knowing that the unseen passenger could appear at any moment. Occasional passengers on these late-night buses also report glimpses of a woman sitting quietly in the rear, her presence almost imperceptible until the door closes behind them. And just as before, the seat seems to carry weight, but when observed directly, no one is there. The legend persists, growing quietly among drivers and riders. The silent passenger has become a part of Edmonton's nocturnal streets, a ghost tied to the bus route and the city itself. She is invisible, silent, and unpredictable. And anyone traveling the route late at night learns quickly. The back seat is never truly empty, and some passengers are never meant to leave. Deep in the heart of the Crow's Nest Pass lies Blairmore, a town built on the legacy of coal mining. Once bustling with miners and their families, the streets are now quiet, the mountains looming over empty roads. The silence is heavy, pressing down on anyone who ventures into the old mining areas. Abandoned mine entrances scar the hillsides, their dark mouths hinting at decades of labor, accidents, and lives lost. The wind carries a hollow whistle through the peaks, a sound that sometimes resembles faint cries or whispered warnings. Locals avoid wandering near the old mines after dusk. Stories speak of noises that rise from deep underground, screams, clanging tools, and echoes that cannot be explained by the wind alone. In Blairmore, the past is not gone. It lingers in the shadows of the abandoned mines, in the empty streets, and in the mountains that have watched over the town for centuries. And for those brave or foolish enough to approach the Blairmore mine after dark, the echoes of the buried are more than just history. They are warnings, and sometimes they scream. The Blairmore mine is haunted not just by shadows, but by history. Decades ago, a catastrophic collapse claimed the lives of dozens of miners. The town mourned as families were left empty-handed, and the mine was sealed off after rescue efforts failed. Yet the tragedy did not stay buried. Residents who lived nearby began reporting strange occurrences. Muffled cries in the night, distant banging, and the faint smell of coal where none should exist. Old records confirmed the collapse, but they could not explain why the sounds continued. The mine seemed to remember the lives lost within its walls, replaying their final moments through whispers, clatters, and screams that rose from the depths. The tragedy left an imprint, a lingering presence that refused to rest. And those who dared to enter the abandoned shafts after dark discovered that the echoes of the buried were more than just legend. They were a reminder that the past, especially a violent one, never truly disappears. Blairmore's quiet streets may appear peaceful by day, but the shadows of the mine carry the weight of the tragedy, waiting for nightfall to remind the town of the lives buried and the screams that still echo. Even decades after the mine collapse, the Blairmore mine continues to haunt the living. Hikers exploring the mountains near Crow's Nest Pass have reported strange, blood-curdling screams coming from tunnels that were sealed long ago. The sounds echo unnaturally through the rocky terrain, bouncing between cliffs and ridges as if the mountain itself is amplifying the cries. Some hikers describe the screams as frantic, desperate, like miners trapped and struggling, crying out for help that will never come. Others hear the clatter of tools or the faint sounds of footsteps in empty corridors, though no entrance exists to allow anyone inside. Many attempted to investigate, but the deeper they ventured, the louder and more chaotic the sounds became. It was as if the mine itself was alive, replaying the tragedy on a loop, refusing to let the dead rest. The reports have become consistent over the years. Local authorities acknowledge the stories but offer no explanation. The mines are sealed, and no one should be inside. Yet hikers continue to hear the screams, their experiences serving as chilling proof that some tragedies leave an imprint too powerful to fade. Blairmore's abandoned tunnels are not just relics of the past. They are a living memory of the lives lost, echoing across decades and reminding the town, and anyone daring enough to listen, of the darkness buried within the mountains. As night falls over Blairmore, the mountain silence is broken by something far more unsettling than the wind. Hikers and nearby residents report hearing low, guttural growls coming from the sealed mine tunnels. The sound is neither animal nor human, but something in between. An eerie, resonant vibration that seems to crawl over the rocks and settle deep in the chest. It starts softly, almost like distant thunder, then intensifies, rising and falling unpredictably. Some who have heard it describe feeling a strange pressure, as though unseen eyes are tracking their every move. Others say the growls are accompanied by sudden chills or hair-raising sensations, as if invisible claws brush against their skin. No one has ever seen the source. Dogs refuse to venture near the old mine entrances, growling or barking at empty air. Even the wind seems to hesitate before passing through the tunnels, amplifying the unnatural sounds. These nighttime growls are more than unsettling. They are a warning. The Blairmore mine is not just a relic of the past. It houses a presence that remembers, resents, and waits, whispering its fury through the shadows of the mountains. For those who hear it, the message is clear. The mine does not forgive trespassers, and the echoes of the buried are not at rest. Among the townspeople of Blairmore, one elder stands out for his chilling advice. Having lived near the mine for decades, he warns anyone who dares venture close after dark. Don't call out their names. According to him, the screams are not merely echoes. They are conscious, aware, and drawn to attention. Those who have ignored this warning report immediate consequences. Calling out, even inadvertently, seems to provoke the voices. The growls become louder, more aggressive, and the mountain air vibrates with a terrifying resonance that leaves listeners shaken to their core. The elder tells stories of miners' spirits responding to sounds, their anguish heightened when disturbed. He recalls hearing friends and travelers shouting into the dark tunnels, only to have the echoes transform into anguished screams, as if the mine itself were enraged. His warning is simple, yet urgent. Respect the silence, walk quietly, and never summon the echoes by name. For in Blairmore, the dead are restless, and attention is dangerous. The town remembers the tragedy of the past, but the elder reminds everyone, the mine still has a voice, and it speaks only to those who dare to awaken it. Years after the tragedy, a small paranormal investigation group traveled to Blairmore, hoping to capture evidence of the mine's legendary activity. They set up microphones near the sealed entrance, expecting nothing more than the sound of wind and shifting rock. But within minutes, the equipment began to pick up something else. Something unmistakably human. Soft at first, then clearer. A trembling whisper emerged from the darkness. "Help." The investigators froze. The voice was not distorted or faint. It was direct, desperate, almost pleading. They rewound the audio again and again, and each time, the word was unmistakable. Help. As the night deepened, more voices layered behind it. Some crying, some gasping, some whispering incoherently. The mine was sealed, abandoned, and unreachable. Yet the recording suggested people trapped inside, calling out with a pain frozen in time. One investigator described the moment as chilling beyond belief. It didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like people alive right now, begging us not to leave. But when they attempted to approach the entrance, their devices malfunctioned. Batteries drained instantly, lights flickered, and every microphone went silent at the same time. Whatever was speaking from deep within the earth did not want to be approached. But it wanted desperately to be heard. The most recent encounter at the Blairmore mine shook the town like never before. A hiker, unfamiliar with the area, ventured near the sealed tunnels after sunset. He reported hearing the familiar echoes, screams, growls, and whispers. But this time, the sounds felt closer, almost physical. Suddenly, he claimed that unseen hands reached out from the darkness, grabbing at his arms and legs. He struggled to break free, his panic rising as the air grew colder and heavier. Despite calling out for help, no one came. The hands seemed to vanish the instant he looked directly at them, leaving only the lingering sensation of being held by something unseen. Shaken, the hiker stumbled back toward the town, his clothes torn and his skin scratched by invisible claws. Local authorities documented his injuries, but could find no source for the attack. The mountains remained silent afterward, as if nothing had happened. Yet the hiker's terror was real. This incident reinforced what the elders had long warned. The mine is alive with the echoes of those buried within, and it protects its secrets fiercely. Anyone venturing too close risks more than just fright. They risk being touched, pulled, or trapped by forces that do not forgive for intrusion. The Blairmore mine continues to stand as a reminder. Some tragedies never rest, and the echoes of the buried demand respect and fear. Today, the Blairmore mine sits silent, or so it appears. Locals know better. They believe the spirits of the miners are still trapped within the mountain, bound to the tunnels where they perished decades ago. The screams, growls, and whispers are not echoes of the past. They are a lingering presence, forever aware, forever restless. Residents warn hikers, explorers, and the curious. The mine is dangerous, not just for its crumbling tunnels, but for the spirits that guard it. Even decades later, the mountain remembers every life lost, every cry unheard, and every tragedy that occurred in the dark. Some claim that on quiet nights, the sounds rise again. Screams carried on the wind, faint shadows glimpsed near the sealed entrances, and a cold that settles deep into the bones. The Blairmore mine is more than abandoned rock and rusting beams. It is a tomb of memory, pain, and unrest. For those living nearby, the lesson is clear. Respect the mountain, honor the dead, and never venture into the darkness unprepared. Because in Blairmore, the spirits are not gone. They are trapped, aware, and always listening. As our journey through Alberta's small towns comes to an end, it's impossible not to reflect on the haunting blend of beauty and darkness these places hold. From the quiet prairies to the towering mountains, the frozen lakes to the abandoned mines, every landscape carries echoes of the past, tragedies, disappearances, and spirits that refuse to rest. These are not tales spun for entertainment. Each story you've heard tonight comes directly from those who lived it. From police reports, from documented events, and from eyewitness accounts. Alberta's small towns may seem peaceful, familiar, and safe. But beneath that calm lies a world of mysteries that refuse to stay buried. A shadow that watches, a scream that echoes from sealed tunnels, a passenger who cannot leave the bus. These stories remind us that the past has a way of lingering, waiting, and sometimes reaching out. And so, one final thought lingers as you leave this journey behind. In small towns, nothing stays buried forever, not even the past. If you enjoy long-form, deep-dive horror, stay with us. There are countless stories from the darkest corners of the world waiting to be told, and some of them might be closer than you think.